Benson, Donnelly, Ing, Fuhr, Fletcher, Fong, Fuentes, Furutani, Gaines, Galgiani, Garrick, Gatto, Gordon, Gurrell, Grove, Hagman, Halderman, Hall, Harkey, Hayashi, Hernandez, Hill, Huber, Weso, Huffman, Jeffries, Jones, Knight, Lara, Logue, Lowenthal, Ma, Mansour, Mendoza, Miller, Mitchell, Monning, Morrell, Nastande, Nielsen, Norby, Olson, Pan, Perea, V. Manuel Perez, Portantino, Silva, Skinner, Smythe, Solorio, Swanson, Torres, Valadeo, Wagner, Wykowski, Williams, Yamada, Mr. Speaker.
The sergeants will call in the absent members. The sergeants will call in the absent members. The absent members should report to the floor immediately. A quorum is present. We ask our guests and visitors in the rear of chambers and in the gallery to please stand for the prayer. Today, the Assembly will conduct its remembrance of the tragic events of September 11th, 2001, and we will commemorate the 10th anniversary. We will have a prayer from our Assembly chaplain, Father Constantine Papadimos, and guest chaplain, Surjit Deline in West Sacramento. Father Papadimos.
Let us pray. Lord, we pause this morning to remember the attacks made against our nation 10 years ago on September 11th. We thank you for keeping us safe from many similar attacks since then, and we pray that you strengthen our President and our security forces, that they remain vigilant. We have changed in many ways over the past 10 years, but one thing that hasn't been shaken is our devotion to the individual liberty that has been endowed to us by you. Your gift of freedom to humanity is a precious gift that all Americans cherish and that many around the world try to smother. Thank you for your gift of freedom and of faith in you, O good and loving God. Grant rest to those who were killed in the attacks 10 years ago, comfort their families, and bless all those who struggle to rescue and help in the aftermath. As we pray and remember this morning, we ask that you fill us with a holy determination to pursue all the dreams and desires you have placed in our heart, for you are blessed forevermore. Amen.
वाहिगुरु जी का खालसा वाहिगुरु जी की फतेह. Having first remembered God, the Almighty, think of Guru Nanak, the 10th Master Guru Gobind Singh Ji, father of the Khalsa, who has blessed us with the gift of Amrit. May we enjoy his protection everywhere. Turn your thoughts, O Khalsa, to the teachings of Guru Granth Sahib and call on God, wonderful Lord. Almighty God, we humbly request you to keep all men and women who have laid their lives to protect freedom and peace since 9/11 till today, the 10th anniversary. Please keep them in your glorious feet and protect them forever and comfort their families. Nanak Naam Chaddi Kala, Tere Pani Sarbatta Pala. O Nanak, may the name be ever in ascendance in your will. May the good of all prevail. Vaheguru Ji ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji ki Fateh. Thanks.
Amen. We ask our guests and visitors to remain standing and join us in the flag salute. Please join Assemblymember Perea as he leads us.
Colleagues, please place your hand over your heart. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
You may be seated. Reading of the previous day's journal.
Assembly Chamber, Sacramento, Thursday, September 1st, 2011. The Assembly met at 10 a.m. Honorable Fiona Moss, Speaker Pro Tem of the Assembly, presiding. Chief Clerk E. Dustin Wilson at the desk. Reading Clerk Timothy Moore. The reading. The roll was called to Shaji and Alejo, Allen, Amiano, Atkins, Berryhill, Block, Blumenfield, Bradford, Brownlee, Buchanan, Butler, Calderon, Campos, Carter, Cedillo, Chesbro.
Mr. Calderon moves. Ms. Conway seconds that the reading of the previous day's journals be dispensed with. Presentation of petitions. There are none. Introductions and references of bills will be deferred. Reports of committees will be deemed read and amendments deemed adopted. Messages from the Governor, there are none. Messages from the Senate, there are none. Motions and resolutions. The absences for the day will be deemed read and printed in the journal. Today, Friday, September 2nd, is the last day to amend bills. There are Assembly bills on the Senate floor without a floor manager. The Senate has begun to enforce Senate Rule 29, which means that Assembly measures on the Senate floor, which are passed on file 3 times, will be sent to the inactive file. If you don't already have one, please find a floor manager for your bills as soon as possible. Concurrence referrals. Pursuant to Assembly Rule 77.2, I'm re-referring the following bills to committee. AB 220, Solorio, to Public Safety. AB 228, Fuentes, to Insurance. AB 696, Wesso, to Jobs and Economic Development. AB 1352, Logue, to Local Government. AB 1423, Perea, to Revenue and Taxation. AB 656, Huber, to Business and Consumer Protections. Mr. Calderon, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Pursuant to Rule 45.5, request unanimous consent to allow Assemblymember Yamada to have guests and photographers on the floor and at the rostrum for the remembrance of the 9/11 tragedy.
Without objection.
Also, pursuant to Assembly Rule 69, request unanimous consent to suspend that rule to allow Ms. Skinner to take up file item 117 ACR 81 without reference to file for the purposes of third reading today.
Without objection.
Also, move to suspend Rule 69 to request unanimous consent to suspend it to allow the floor managers to take up late amendments at the desk for the following bills without reference to file. File item 133, file item 197, file item 199, and file item 213.
Without objection. Mr. Hagman.
Mr. Speaker, we do object to these late amendments and ask for a roll call vote. I would suggest maybe we take up the first one and substitute the roll for the four items.
Very good. Mr. Hagman objects. Mr. Calderon moves. Mr. Allen seconds that we suspend Assembly Rule 69 to allow the floor managers to take up late amendments without reference to the file on file items 133, 197, 199, and 213. The first vote will be for file item 133. The clerk will open the roll. Mr. Calderon asks for an aye vote. Mr. Hagman asks for a no vote.
Mr. Speaker, I believe Mr. Hagman had requested a substitute roll call for all.
Yes, we will do that as soon as we're done.
He's withdrawing that request.
Strike the roll. Again, the motion then, Mr. Calderon moves, Mr. Allen seconds, that we suspend Assembly Rule 69. It is one motion inclusive for file items 133, 197, 199, 213. Mr. Hagman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to divide the roll for each one if possible. Have a separate vote.
The question is divisible.
Now the request is for division. Unanimous consent is granted to divide the question. Before us is the suspension of Rule 69 as it relates to file item 133. Mr. Calderon asks for an aye vote. Mr. Hagman asks for a no vote. Open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. 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 This motion requires 41. All members vote who desire to vote. 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 Close the roll, tally the vote. Ayes 41, noes 24. The motion carries. Mr. Calderon requests unanimous consent to substitute the roll on the previous measure for file items 197, 199, 213. Is there objection? Mr. Hagman?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Pursuant to Rule 102, we'd like to divide the question and have a roll call vote in each measure.
The motion on file item 197, Mr. Calderon asked for an aye vote. Mr. Hagman asked for a no vote. Open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. 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 Close the roll, tally the vote. Ayes 41, noes 24. Same motion on file item 199. Mr. Calderon asked for an aye vote. Mr. Hagman asked for a no vote. Open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Close the roll, tally the vote. Ayes 42, noes 24. Mr. Hagman, you gained an extra aye vote. Now, on file item 213, we're substituting the motion. Mr. Calderon asked for an aye vote. Mr. Hagman asked for a no vote. Clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. 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 Close the roll, tally the vote. Ayes 41, noes 25. Measure passes. Mr. Calderon.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I request unanimous consent to suspend Assembly Rule 78 to allow the floor manager to take up amendments at the desk for the following bill without reference to file, and that's file item 110A17, SB 922.
Mr. Hagman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We do object to these suspension of rules and ask for a roll call vote on that.
Motion before us is suspension of Assembly Rule 78 as reference to file item 110A17, SB 922. Mr. Calderon asked for an aye vote. Mr. Hagman asked for a no vote. Clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Close the roll, tally the vote. Ayes 42, noes 25. Measure passes. Motion carries. Under motions and resolutions, on behalf of Ms. Skinner, I'd like to welcome guests observing the session in the gallery. They are Peter Maag, President and CEO of Novartis, Heather Stevens, Director of Marketing Access, Devin Whitney of the California Healthcare Institute. Without objection, we will move to file item 118, H.R. 21, Yamada. The clerk will read.
House Resolution 21 by Assemblymember Yamada and others relative to September 11, 2001.
Ms. Yamada.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker and members. Good morning to you all. I rise this morning with great honor and great humility to present H.R. 21, jointly authored by John Perez and myself, but on behalf of all of us here in this House. H.R. 21 acknowledges the 10th anniversary of the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001, to honor the heroes and the casualties, and to recognize September 11th of each year as a day of remembrance and service. This 10th anniversary resolution serves to recall the uniting of the world's cultures and nationalities in condemnation of terrorism and the great outpouring of charity and compassion that followed in the aftermath of the attacks 10 years ago. The outpouring signifies the victory of the human spirit over depravity, savagery, and cowardice. As you may remember, members, nearly 3,000 men, women, and children from more than 70 countries around the world were killed at the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, and in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. These acts of terrorism caused the destruction of 2 prominent World Trade Center towers, nearby buildings, a portion of the Pentagon, 4 airline jets, and the loss of innocent American lives and countless injuries to many others who rushed in to rescue them. After 10 years, Californians continue to join the American public in pouring out their hearts in grief and sympathy for the family and friends of those who perished or suffered or continue to suffer in the aftermath of the attacks. Further, we salute and remember the hundreds of heroic men and women, first responders, who sacrificed their lives to help others, and to pay tribute to the valiant men and women of the armed forces, their families, those who have fallen, those who have been wounded and returned to our shores today, and those who continue to defend the freedom of America and those around the world. The memory of the 9/11 tragedy serves as a reminder that the United States is a nation of healing, hope, and resilience, and that out of many, we are one. And with that, I respectfully ask for your aye vote on H.R. 21.
Thank you, Ms. Yamada. Mr. Swanson.
Mr. Speaker, permission to hold prop.
Without objection.
I would like to thank Ms. Yamada and members of this chamber for taking up this very important resolution and providing recognition on this 10th anniversary of a very tragic moment in American history, but a very important moment for us in American history. 10 years ago, my cousin Wanda Green on September 10th called home to Oakland and said to my aunt that she would be on the morning flight, Flight 93. Wanda, a senior flight attendant on Flight 93, like the other passengers, not knowing what was in store that day, engaged the terrorists in an act of courage to prevent this plane from being used as a weapon, we suspect targeted at Washington, D.C. So my cousin Wanda is an American hero, along with her crew members and the passengers on Flight 93. So the recognition that we have given to those heroes, these true patriots, is truly appreciated by me, by my family, and the families of all those that lost loved ones on that day. This has truly been a test of our democracy, one that I think that we have successfully met. My appreciations go out to Assemblymember Yamada, the Speaker, for allowing the ceremony, and my colleagues for joining us in recognition of the families and these true patriots. I ask for your aye vote.
Thank you, Mr. Swanson. Mr. Nielsen.
Mr. Speaker and ladies and gentlemen of the Assembly, that tragic day brought out the better angels in our nature as Americans. You saw the heroism of the common person, the unsung gestures of those who did their duty and paid a horrible price. But we all have paid a price for that day. The innocence and complacency that we had, again, as a society, been lulled into, was torn asunder. Just as December 7th, 1941 has lived in the psyche of generations of Americans, and something that we ought not ever forget. So must 911. Those better angels of our nature were countered by the darker angels of the nature of other people across the world. And I remarked in a column on the 5th anniversary I wrote of 911 how we forget. All the flags that appeared on the cars for some months after 911 disappeared. We became more preoccupied with civil trials instead of military tribunals, and that dominated the news. We became concerned of the inconvenience of taking off our belts and our shoes at the airports. Now, we've become a bit accustomed to that. But I submit our vigilance must not diminish as we remember and as we pray for those heroes who were lost. Let us resolve ourselves, ladies and gentlemen, to keep this nation secure, that our children and grandchildren may not endure another such day.
Thank you, Mr. Nilsen. Mr. Chesbro.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There were many heroes that day, our public safety personnel who charged into burning buildings to rescue the folks and really created a miracle in terms of the level of casualty that there was, and we're honoring them today. But like my colleague, Mr. Swanson, I just wanted to name one who comes from my district and was on that same flight. Richard Guadagno was the manager of the Humboldt Bay Wildlife Refuge, and he was one of the participants in helping the crew to secure the plane and prevent the terrible circumstance that could have occurred, and went down with the plane as well. And I know in naming one, it tends to underemphasize the many others, so I don't want to do that. I think we're honoring all of them, but also in naming one, we remember that these were each individuals who had families, who had every reason to live, but were willing to make the sacrifice to protect others in spite of that. And so I did want to mention Richard Guadagno. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chesbro. Mr. Donnelly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I rise just to say that on 9/11, halfway through that morning, we stopped being Republicans, we stopped being Democrats, we stopped being lawyers, teachers, doctors, and we just became Americans. And as we come up on the 10th anniversary, it just reminds me that as a country, as a state, we need to pause and remember that. And realize that every one of us, even though we approach these problems from different points of view, we all care deeply about this country and its future. You know, it was Thomas Jefferson who said that the price of liberty is eternal vigilance. And I think on 9/11, an innocent nation lost its innocence, and we woke up the next morning and we realized that we needed to become active citizens. And I think it is a credit and a tribute to who we are as Americans that we are resolving our problems through political process and through peaceful means, and that we still are that shining light, that beacon of hope throughout the world. And it's a sad day, but it's a day that I think harkens to the world that they better not count America out. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Donnelly. Mr. Wessel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I just want to remind us all how much as a country we have invested, especially in recording the past, to understand the contributions people have made to our democracy, to our way of life, to our culture. And we hold all those people in very high regard, the ones that have gone above the expectations and the call of duty to make a contribution to our society. And what happened in New York City on September 11th in 2001 was one of those incidents where Americans often seen as they weren't politicians, they weren't military personnel on that day, they were common folk, showed their values as Americans, showed that they valued human life, they valued their fellow man more than their own, and they put themselves in harm's way. The police officers, the firefighters, the public servants, the average person on the street that showed exemplary courage and gave of themselves so that someone else can live. This is extraordinary in our culture, and I hope that we never forget. I remember exactly where I was in that moment, and I'll never forget it. And I know many of you probably remember that too, will never forget it. But I hope that our children that probably weren't alive there, and their children that weren't alive there, never forget how important that day was to our community, to our culture, to our values. And I hope that those people that contributed so greatly to inspiring us and reminding us that we can also do great things and make enormous contributions, that we never forget them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wessel. Mr. Alejo.
Mr. Speaker and members, I also rise in support of this resolution and to honor the thousands of lives that were lost on that tragic day. I remember 10 years ago, I was just graduating from law school, just about to start my own legal career, and be able to focus on that television and see the tragedies that was occurring on the other side of our country. But it certainly went down as a day that our country and the world will never forget. The brave men and women who put their lives on the lines, our firefighters, our police officers, their names will never be forgotten as well. But I also remember, as a member of the California Advisory Committee of the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, what happened shortly thereafter, and the many and record numbers of hate crimes that were focused against our fellow Americans, who were Muslim Americans, Sikh Americans, Arab Americans, that we also not make these mistakes in the past when there's been tragedies in our country, that we, in a time of hurt and in a time of healing, that we not misdirect that towards our fellow Americans. So I wanted to also acknowledge that we learn from the lessons of the past, and also that the healing includes all of us, no matter what our background is. And let's remember the lives of all those on September 11th, 2001, through this resolution. And I thank Ms. Yamada for leading us on the ceremony today.
Mr. Cedillo.
Ms. Yamada, thank you for bringing this forward. None of us will ever forget where we were that morning with the experiences of the day. Let me echo, as others have said, it was an incredible time for our nation, and it was a moment of national unity that we have seldom experienced. We were not people of color. We're not Republicans or Democrats. We were all inclusive, all American. We were all inclusive and all American. Every single victim there was embraced. And we were all victims on that day. I think of the son of our colleague, Bob Pacheco, a firefighter who left here on the West Coast, went to the East Coast to get engaged in the recovery, and the incredible impact it had both on the father and the son. I think of the men and women whose families were not nearby, who were unknown in many respects. And yet we all embrace them as Americans. Let me suggest that as we go forward in the next few days, that we keep that thought and that moment in mind, and that the best way to honor those victims is to try to move forward with that great sense of national unity and with that great acceptance that we are all Americans. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cedillo. Ms. Conway. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members. 10 years ago, on a September morning like today, our former Assembly colleagues were arriving to work at the Capitol. It was supposed to be an ordinary legislative day in the middle of this busy end of the season rush. But September 11th, 2001 was anything but an ordinary morning. As our colleagues arrived at work, they were confronted with the images of New York, Washington, and Pennsylvania. In trying to make sense of this tragedy, Democrats and Republicans came together as Californians, united in support of our fellow Americans. It didn't matter that they came from different communities, different faiths, and different points of view. On 9/11, our colleagues mourned together, expressed their anger together, and strengthened their resolve together. The very next day, on September 12th, representatives of nearly every faith joined members and staff for a special memorial ceremony. They did something that our terrorist enemies would find abhorrent. They cherished our freedom. And they celebrated what makes us all proud to be Americans, our religious diversity and our individual spirit. They didn't let the enemies of freedom stop our work in the People's House. It is my hope that each of us will keep this uniting spirit of 9/11 in our hearts every day. This year, our remembrance of 9/11 has a very personal meaning for each of us. Our colleague and friend, Jeff Gorell, can't be with us today. He is overseas, defending our freedom and fighting for those who brought down the World Trade Center on 9/11. I hope that you will join me in praying for his family and for Jeff's safe return very soon. As we mark the 10th anniversary of 9/11, we remember the 3,000 people who died at the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. We will never forget the passengers on American Flight 11, American Flight 77, United Flight 175, and United Flight 93. They lost their lives in an unthinkable act. We remember the dozens of Californians who died that day, including the brave souls who rose up against the terrorists on United 93. As we continue to take pride in the hundreds of first responders and volunteers from California who went to New York to help in the rescue and recovery efforts. Members, much has changed in the 10 years since 9/11, but one thing remains constant: our unwavering resolve to never back down in the face of those who would hurt our fellow Americans or infringe upon our freedoms. Thank you. May God continue to bless California always, and with obvious support for Ms. Yamada's resolution.
Thank you, Leader Conway. Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Members, I rise in support of this resolution. In just over a week's time, our nation will commemorate the 10th anniversary of the worst attack on American soil in our history. We will honor those who lost their lives on that day, the men and women who worked in the World Trade Center, the brave passengers of United Flight 93 who gave their lives to bring down their captive plane, the first responders who rushed to rescue of so many without regard to their own lives and safety, and our brave servicemen and women who've been deployed overseas in defense of the United States. It's often said that 9/11 was the day that the world changed, and certainly the ensuing decade has seen the United States confront any number of challenges. But as we think back on the attack and the days immediately following, we remember not so much the tragedy, but also the strength and the resilience and compassion shown by all Americans during those dark and tragic days. In so many ways, Americans chose to respond to the tragedy with love and compassion and patriotism. We remember the images of long lines at blood banks where so many Americans rushed to donate blood to the victims. We remember the stories of the heroic firefighters giving their lives just to save a few more victims. We remember groups of Americans consoling each other by singing songs like God Bless America and the national anthem at candlelight vigils all over our country. And we remember the profound sense of unity that only an event like 9/11 could bring to the surface. Indeed, I believe that the ultimate lesson of the September 11th attacks is that the ties that bind us as a nation are far stronger than our occasional differences that push us apart. That sense of unity and pride in country was an excellent expression of Dr. King's vision that the United States is connected through an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. For 10 years, our nation has grieved. In ways large and small, we're still dealing with the effects of the attack. The memories of those first minutes, hours, and days will be with each of us forever. But we will remember most about the attack is that it aimed to break the spirit of the United States and instead prove that the spirit of our people, our pride as a nation, and our compassion towards each other are what defines us as Americans. I ask for an aye vote.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ms. Yamada, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, thank you all for your eloquent remarks on H.R. 21. I would just like to close by saying this. I know that any one of us on this floor could have been the author of this resolution because each one of us in our own ways, in our own districts, in our own communities, have felt the sting of 9/11, the pain and the suffering and the continuing problems that emanate from this act of 10 years ago. I consider it a great privilege to bring this resolution forward on behalf of us all because, you know, in any generation there is a defining moment. In my parents' and grandparents' generation, it was December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor Day, when we know the aftermath included hysteria and acts by our own government taken against our own American citizens that we all recognize to have been a breach of the Constitution and that this government at the highest level had come to terms with, admitted wrongdoing, and made apology. I thank in particular Mr. Alejo for raising the issue of ensuring that as we observe the 10th anniversary of 9/11, that we remember that we are all indeed Americans and that we are entitled to constitutional protections and that we have an obligation really to look out for one another, especially in the days ahead as we come to the actual 10th anniversary. But I'm very grateful to have been able at this point in my time here in the Assembly to bring this resolution forward because the very fact that I'm able to stand here as an elected member of the greatest legislature in the country is testament to the fact that we are defending the exact freedoms that we should be defending, that despite the mistakes that we have made as a country at times, this country has the greatest capacity to recover, to be resilient, and to lead again on the pathway to peace and prosperity. And so with that, members, I ask that you support H.R. 21 and hope that you will join Speaker Perez and me in co-authoring this important 10th anniversary recognition. I ask for your aye vote.
Thank you, Ms. Yamada. The first roll will be open for co-authors. The first roll is for co-authors. The clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. This is for co-authors, members. All members vote who desire to vote. Close the roll, tally the vote. We have 69 co-authors. We will move on to a voice vote on the resolution in chief. All in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed, nay. The resolution is adopted. Members, we will now move on to the Assembly remembrance of the 9/11 tragedy. Ms. Yamada, you are recognized at your desk.
Thank you again, Mr. Speaker and members. I am privileged and honored to have amongst our guests today those that I would like to bring forward for recognition now. You heard our guest chaplain, Surjit Singh Dhillon, who is with the Sacramento Sikh Temple, and Amarjit Dhillon, who is also a representative of the Sacramento Sikh Temple, which happens to be in West Sacramento, my district. I'm also pleased to introduce Basim El-Kara, who is the Executive Director of the Council of American Islamic Relations, Sacramento Valley Chapter, and also Chair of the Arab American Caucus of the California Democratic Party. Thank you, gentlemen, for being with us. Please give them a hand. As mentioned, Mr. Speaker, if I may just indulge, all three of these gentlemen have been working very hard in the past 10 years to ensure that the civil rights of Muslims, Sikhs, and South Asians are protected in California, and I am pleased to have partnered with them. Next, I would like to, if I may, as our guests are being greeted, invite several of our first responders and firefighters to come to rear of chambers.
If we could please allow our first responders to step forward.
Thank you. I would like to introduce first Mr. Blas Ayala, who has been a Davis firefighter for 12 years from my hometown of Davis, currently serving and stationed at station number 31. Next, I would like to introduce firefighter Dan Wong, who's also from my hometown of the city of Davis. He is also currently assigned to station 31 and has been with our fire department for 9 years. And if I might add, came in second at the firefighters cook-off at the state fair. We're going to take number 1 next year, aren't we, Dan? Next, I would like to introduce Mike Daw, fire captain with Sac Metro Fire Department for 24 years. Captain Daw responded to New York with the Sacramento area USAR team to assist in search and recovery efforts after the 9/11 attacks. Next, we have Andrew Whipple, a firefighter who has been with the city of Davis for 4 years. Firefighter Whipple has served as a corporal in the U.S. Marine Corps, 1st Reconnaissance Battalion at Camp Pendleton, California, and has done 2 tours in Iraq. Following Andrew Whipple is Captain Bobby Wiest, the 3rd District Vice President of the California Professional Firefighters. Captain Wiest is currently assigned to Station 31 and has been with the City of Davis Fire Department for 27 years. And I might add that his son is also a firefighter. Last but not least, I would like to introduce Lou Paulson, who is the president of the California Professional Firefighters. I'm very pleased to have Mr. Paulson join us today. And I'm not sure if we did have Chief Terrell of West Sacramento. Was he able to join us? He was not able to join us, but certainly we want to recognize all of the firefighters throughout California who went to serve and continue to serve and continue to suffer the ill effects of 9/11. Please give our first responders a hand.
Ms. Yamada, I ask that you please escort our first responders through the center aisle to the front of chambers. Ms. Yamada, you are recognized at Ms. Conway's desk if you'd like to describe what we are unveiling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Ms. Conway, for allowing me to use your desk. Ladies and gentlemen, on your desks is a copy of a news article that ran earlier this year in my hometown news of Davis, California, the Davis Enterprise. It recounts the story of how we in Yolo County, just a little old county across the river, of at that time less than 200,000 residents, was able to step up and acquire one of the first 150 pieces of the World Trade Center Memorial Seal that was being let out by then Mayor Bloomberg, still Mayor Bloomberg. We worked very hard to bring this piece of the steel girder to Yolo County. The story, I won't go into all the details since you do have a copy of the article. But, you know, looking at it now 10 years hence, I can say that it still instills in me a sense of pride and also of the power of the human spirit, that we are able to have this portable exhibit and take it around to schools, to different organizations that would like to hear the story of 9/11 and what it truly means for us as Californians, as Americans. It may be a small piece of the World Trade Center girder, but I think it stands for the endurance and the persistence of the human spirit. This memorial is designed to be touched and to be a point of grieving. In our first memorial, almost now 9 years ago, there was a huge outpouring of participation and grief, and now 10 years hence, we can look at it in a little bit of a different light, but still with the commitment that we should all work for peace and prosperity. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Ms. Yamada. I ask our guests and visitors to please rise and join all of us in an extended moment of silence as part of our memorial of the tragic events of Tuesday, September 11th, 2001. Thank you. Should individuals wish to look at the memorial still more closely, starting 15 minutes from now, it'll be available in room 317 until the noon hour. On behalf of Ms. Yamada and myself, I want to thank today's program participants and the membership for their participation in the Assembly remembrance of the 9/11 tragedy. This concludes our ceremony. Please be seated. We'll proceed with the day's business. Members, there's been a request for unanimous consent to allow for a temporary recess to allow for a Republican caucus. Unanimous consent is granted. We will take a temporary recess to allow for a Republican caucus in the Assembly Rules Committee room.